Hello, and this is the Apocalypse Will Be podcasted. We are a married couple from Atlanta with boring day jobs. We have been together 12 years, and we usually create a lot of weird performance art to entertain people. But we are trying our hand at having a podcast because we have had an obsession lately, and that obsession is Dungeon Crawler Carl. This is a spoilers podcast, and we will be discussing plot points from all 7 Dungeon Crawler Carl books. You should not start this podcast until you have finished book 7. We will not be discussing anything from Patreon or the Pineapple Cabaret. There are spoilers from this point forward. Be warned. Hey, so just a couple of notes about today's podcast. While our goal is to be pretty equal as far as who is contributing what and what we have to say, Nikki got a little obsessed with this episode and they did a ton of research. So I'm going to let them mostly take the lead here. And can you tell us a little bit about what we're going to be talking about today?
Yeah, I've definitely gotten a little obsessed. I have put, I don't even know how many hours into this. And today we are going to be discussing the prologue of this inevitable ruin, which is the second part of the conversation between Polly and Carl. This episode is going to have a specific structure. And the first item that we're going to be discussing is finding some of the key factions and terms that I think it's important to understand to really get into the meat of the prologue. After that, we're going to establish a brief timeline of the information that we learn about the apothecary, the residuals, and a couple other key components throughout the entire series. After that, we're going to briefly go through the original conversation between Polly and Carl from book 6. Now, remember that conversation was brought on by the Open Intellect Pacifist Network, probably primarily Porthos, giving that pamphlet to Carl in a loot box. After that, we're going to really break down the second part of that conversation between Polly and Carl, which is the prologue of book 7. All right, so these are the key factions and terms that are important to understand everything we're talking about today. First up is the Krakaren / the Apothecary. They are one and the same. It's a collective mind that is capable of synthesizing organic materials to make almost any kind of biological matter. Apothecary is its proper name, whereas the Krakaren is kind of like a political slur used to defame the apothecary. The apothecary has been alleged to have given the means or the technology to the Plenty to develop the tunneling system. In book 8, they sponsor a lot of the top 10 crawlers. Next up, we're going to talk about the Eulogist. So, Brie, what's your understanding of what the Eulogist is?
So it's the Series System AI, and it's a stable primal AI engine. The materials harvested during the crawl are fed to it, growing the area it envelops, and it's seen as ancient alien technology that no one truly understands.
Right?
It is supposedly dormant in some form without personality or awareness, but we do have some reasons to question that. And it allows people in the Series System to live very long lives.
Right. Yep. So Eulogist is the center system AI, and that's what creates the zone that is ever expanding as they feed harvested materials to it that come from the crawl.
Okay, now let's go into a little bit about residuals. So, can you tell me about the 2 different kinds?
Yes. So there are 2 forms of aliens that attempt to infiltrate the crawl each season. They do this through various means and each have their own agenda. On paper, their agendas seem similar, but they are vastly different. The first faction of the residuals is the apothecary affiliated ones. There are thousands of them per crawl. They're part of a collective mind, and their stated mission is to end the crawl. It's more complicated than that. Also, they want to teach the infant AIs how to speak to their ancestors and feed themselves, which is kind of mysterious and unclear. A more in-depth goal of theirs is that they want to cause war, unrest, mayhem, etc. in the center system. Would you agree with that, Brie?
Yeah, definitely. And I would say that the way that makes sense for me to think about it is that this has some strong Hunger Game vibes. And I kind of think of the Series System like the Capitol.
Yeah, that's definitely a good analogy. They also seem to have some kind of plan related to the eulogist, but even with all the information and research I've done, some of this is still unclear because there's just not enough information in the books. Maybe Matt doesn't even know all the answers yet. All right, so after that, we have the eulogist affiliated residuals. That is the team that Agatha is part of. They're a rare type of brainworm, but not Baltae. It's unclear exactly what kind of brainworm they are. Unlike the Apothecary residuals, there's only a few Eulogist residuals per crawl. Their goals are a lot more unclear. We see a lot more of Agatha throughout the books. Nobody's ever really sure what she's doing.
It took several books for people to even get any kind of information about what was going on with her, what her goals are. It's really funny because I participate a lot in the Reddit discussions, and there are so many people who are like, "What's Agatha's deal?" And people are like, "Okay, have you finished the books? All right, we'll talk to you when you finish book 7."
Right. I mean, we pretty much have no idea what Agatha's deal is until her chapter at the end of book 6. Their goals are a lot more unclear both to the reader and the characters and systems of government in the book, but they do view the eulogist as some sort of being of worship, something that should be protected, and their mantra is may the eulogist ever sleep. Agatha does state that if it were up to her, all biological life in the entire galaxy would be eradicated. It's still unclear if that is just Agatha's view or the view of all of the eulogist affiliated residuals, but I'm confident that it is their collective goal. Okay, so now we are going to break down the original conversation between Polly and Carl from book 6. A couple of important things to keep in mind before we get into this is that the Open Intellect Pacifist Network is who gets Carl to the homeless shelter. We later learn that Porthos is working with the apothecary. Another important note is that multiple people say that the residuals say nonsense, lies. Agatha states in her chapter that they spout known inaccuracies and half truths. We are going to be reading some passages and then discussing them. What's the first passage?
There are several thousand of us on the surface of this planet, awaiting the introduction of the crawl. Most people think we still have a few years. The collective thinks it might be sooner than that. Either way, when it occurs, we will do our best to attract the entrance to our location. Then we will proceed inside and quickly pass our information to the new AI. Our existence is no secret, but the showrunners usually do their best to edit us out of any footage, hoping people will forget. They can't stop us, not without the assistance of the system AI, who rarely cooperates, as it always wants to know what we have to say.
It's very interesting to note how many of them are on the planet, and then a lot of times they never even make it into the dungeon despite that.
And in this book, Agatha says that she did start a fire at the Meadowlark retirement home because she was trying to get enough people outside that a stairwell would open up.
So are the apothecary affiliated residuals not employing that tactic? It's strange that they seem to have this issue of not being able to get into the dungeon.
I mean, I think we just don't know at this point.
Right? By their own admission, it only takes a few for their goal to be complete. It's mentioned multiple times that the macro AI wants to know what the residuals have to say, and these macro AIs are curious about it, so they let it happen over and over again. The next passage is my kind exists within almost every intelligent civilization with a primal engine. You probably don't know what that is. Doesn't matter. Years ago, they tried to exterminate us. We don't interfere. Our purpose is nothing more than to tell the infant, terrified AI how to speak with its ancestors. Now, they mentioned that years ago they tried to exterminate us. That is likely the Syndicate, Orient, Kuatin, various systems of government. But did they try to exterminate just the residuals and apothecary agents trying to enter the dungeon, or were they trying to exterminate the entirety of the apothecary? I'm likely to believe that they were trying to exterminate the apothecary as a whole because there is a lot of fear and prejudice towards them because nobody really knows what their end goal is and think that they have some malicious goal to bring everybody into their collective.
I mean, one of their stated goals is to end the crawl, which would financially decimate many key entities in the universe. And it would also kill millions of people. So that's kind of the definition of a malicious goal, in my opinion.
I guess so, yeah. Yeah. I also really like the part that says, you probably don't know what that is. Doesn't matter. And that's a great example of lampshade hanging because we would really like to know. Don't hold this over us. We want to know. Tell us more.
Well, and I just will say I have some sympathy for Matt because when you're a writer, I think you're writing because it's an inherent need that you have inside of you to tell stories. You know, they just kind of have to go somewhere and you don't know what's going to blow up. And there are not a lot of properties that have blown up to the point that Dungeon Crawler Carl is at right now, where people are going over them with fine tooth comb in the way that people are now.
Yeah, I imagine that's got to maybe make you a little, would you say, nervous, anxious?
Not nervous. I would just say that I think when that happens that you go into a series thinking that you're writing one thing and it does develop a life on its own because of how the fandom picks it up.
Right. After that, the conversation goes on a little bit more. We don't really learn anything important. And then, right as Polly says, there's a war amongst my kind, two sides with two very different goals. Let me tell you how to shut off the. And then Carl is yanked out by Orin and into the Desperado Club, which brings us into our next passage. Orin says, they are a hyperspatial collective mind alien race without a home. They usually remain quiet, but every once in a long while, a group of them decide they are unhappy with their station and they fabricate drama in order to get people to remember they exist. Ignore their machinations.
I think this is blatantly untrue. I do not think that Orin is being honest here. I think he and we're just going to call them the powers that be from now on. I believe that they have an idea of what the residuals want, and they are trying to mislead Carl to de escalate the situation.
Right? And then the powers that be don't want anybody to know what is up with the residuals, and despite their efforts to remove them from the feeds of the show, there are basically entire subreddits dedicated to figuring it out.
Yeah, these people have a lot of money on the line, and they're trying to protect that at all costs, and the residuals are standing against that.
And Oren does have a responsibility, and he is employed by the syndicate, but he also, manages the relationship between the showrunners and the system AI.
And we'll be discussing this more in depth later, but I don't think that Oren is really a bad guy. I think he does, in some ways, want what's best for everyone, what's best for Carl, and he is trying to protect people, but, as he continually says, have to work within his limitations. So the next passage we want to go over is Oren says they being the open intellect pacifist network, believed falsely that if they could get you within earshot of that speech, that one of two things would happen. Either we would be forced to yank you away, which would upset the AI to the point of killing us all, or we wouldn't yank you away, but the information the residual was giving turned out to be so dangerous the Syndicate Council would immediately pull the failsafe, which would in effect kill this solar system star. In either of those scenarios, it would be the end of the crawl for a long time.
But a third option happened, and the AI did agree with Oren to let him pull Carl out. But Oren doesn't know about the entire secret conversation that happens. Both Carl and the AI, I think, pull this off brilliantly. And especially Carl, despite things happening so fast and him getting yanked out, he's kind of able to cover and act like that whole secret message never happened. And then moving forward in all of his dealings with Orin and Quasar, even going into the negotiations of like, oh, can I keep these neural upgrades and enhancements or not? I believe this happened because the AI had already heard Polly's speech, either during the conversation with Carl or possibly even multiple times before because Polly was reciting this speech every single day. There are multiple days on floor 8. So the AI could have easily gone and checked it out as soon as Carl got that flyer from the Open Intellect Pacifist Network. It already knew the secret message and everything that Polly had to say, but it wanted to see how Carl was going to react.
Well, it's obviously more than that. I think that the AI wanted Carl to get the neural upgrade because the AI believes that that will give him more power. And it does seem like that's what happens.
Right. And we learn later that he's getting some information from Agatha as well. We believe from Agatha. And then once it gets that satisfaction and see that Carl gets the neural enhancement upgrade, it doesn't care at all if Orin pulls him out of the situation or not.
Yeah. And we're trying to keep to the text of this chapter and save some information from later episodes. But there's definitely a lot that I am very excited to talk about too related to this later in the book.
But as we have stated multiple times, we are a spoilers podcast. Our next passage is where Oren states, I'm quite certain your former sponsors didn't actually know what he was going to say, and they gambled everything on it being something profound. They gambled and they lost. Now they're fugitives. their assets frozen, and their lives ruined. The AI is only mildly perturbed, but it appears more upset that it too had been misled into believing this information would be something interesting. So, my takeaway here is that Carl's sponsors did know or have a pretty good idea of what Paulie was going to say, both in the secret and not secret part of his speech, because they're working directly with the apothecary. So, they had a pretty good idea. And Oren, I don't think, had any idea about the secret part of Paulie's message.
I'm not entirely sure about that. I think he might know. He just might not be able to speak frankly because people are watching him.
I still don't necessarily think that's true because if Oren and the other people that are watching this already knew, then this entire interaction would have gone much, much differently. They would have, I think, acted a lot sooner than they end up coming back to it later in book 7.
Yeah, I do think it is interesting to consider that time doesn't seem to go the same way in the dungeon that it does for people not in the dungeon. So maybe less time has passed between these two interactions than we think it has.
That's entirely possible.
Yeah, I mean, it says a couple of times like Carl was gone for 4 days. And, for him, it was just like maybe like 30 minutes.
Yeah, that is definitely an interesting point. I hadn't considered that. After this, the conversation keeps going, and Quasar is pulled in, and there's negotiations between Carl and Orin and Quasar as to what items Carl can keep and all of that. And that is something we'll be covering in a future episode when we get around to book 6.
Which might be like 10 years. These books are chonky like Princess Donut, so that might be a while, but we'll get to it someday.
Absolutely. So, anyway, between like 5 and 520 weeks from now. So now that we've gone over that background information, we are going to thoroughly break down the secret conversation between Polly and Carl, which is the prologue of book 7. And this happens right before Oren pulls Carl out of that situation. This is where we start really getting into the fun stuff for this episode. The first passage that we're going to be reading is Polly. If you can hear this, that means the current system AI is allowing us to have a real talk. Everything I say in real time from this point forward is mostly bullshit, and it's nothing surprising. And this is awesome because the AI is allowing this to happen. It wants to see what happens. It has a goal here. I think it already knows what Polly says during his normal speech and the secret part, as we covered in last episode. But it wants to see how it goes down once Carl is there and Carl gets the neural enhancement, or whether he's going to get it or not. And this makes a lot of sense because the system AI is obsessed with Carl. And so anything that involves Carl, it's going to look at that with a magnifying glass.
Second passage. The AI had slowed time, but Polly had done something to speak incredibly fast, similar to what happened during boss battles when the AI decided to spout off its ridiculously long descriptions.
And I just love this part because I was always kind of curious, like, what was happening during those long descriptions of things, especially like during battles and boss fights. Like, how is this going down? Are they listening to this while they're fighting these monsters?
Well, and I'm sure that this is something that Matt gets fan questions about a lot.
Right. So it's really cool to know how those descriptions that the AI is giving work, that it's feeding all of this into the person's mind super, super fast.
So this brings us to our next passage, and this is a long one, but Polly says, no matter what you might eventually hear, the crawl is absolutely unnecessary. There is no greater good other than greed. They mine your planets for the rare elements used to originally seed the worlds. These elements are inside of you. You and all living things born on one of the preceded worlds has a miniature primal system built into your brain that allows you to interact with the system. It is the size of a grain of sand. Once these systems are activated, they are able to be harvested. The way it was designed is that you would be born, you would live, and you would eventually die. And when you do pass on, the element within you, having grown and filled with the energy of a lifetime, would return to the system, allowing it to keep running. A healthy system is self sustaining. It doesn't grow, it doesn't shrink, it exists in perpetuity.
That's a very information dense passage. And I think that it has a great allegory for capitalism and consumerism. And I think Bree can elaborate on that better than I can.
Yeah, definitely. This entire book, the entire series really is very anti capitalism, and it is very much against the idea that greed is good that was pushed so hard in the 80s. So basically, what Polly slash Matt is saying here is that in a healthy system, it just continues to exist. Whereas in the American capitalist system, businesses always have to grow more, they always have to do more. It's not acceptable to just sustain your profits from last quarter. You always have to have bumps in growth.
Right. Growth at any cost. The little man be damned, or the environment be damned.
Yeah, definitely. So, this entire passage is talking about how the crawl only exists to make people rich. It doesn't exist because the sinner system actually needs to be fed. And I think the sinner system is supposed to be an allegory for capitalism and its evil.
Right. And I love getting the information about primal system, how it works. But I'm really curious to know, like, how do seeded worlds happen? The syndicate isn't going around and seeding worlds. These things already exist, and to our understanding, they were created by the primals. And nobody has a good understanding of like how it actually works, other than that these materials can be harvested from the inhabitants of that planet, and then they feed that to the center system to allow it to grow. But what I'd really like to know is at what point does the original planetary primal engine awaken to start consuming these elements and keep things going in perpetuity? Because when they come to initiate a crawl or land war or what have you, they go ahead and install a macro AI to handle everything and so that they can start harvesting these elements. But we don't know when the actual primal engine wakes up. And I think that's a question that we're going to find out later. And I don't have a good theory on that. The next passage is Polly saying, this planetary system, as of right now, doesn't have an active AI. But by the time you hear this, the Mantid made Frankenstein of a system will have been installed, and everyone born on the planet will have their internal systems switched on and activated. When you die in the dungeon, they harvest these elements themselves, starving out the existing planetary AI that doesn't even know how to feed itself until we teach it. My question here is, why can the existing planetary AI not know how to feed itself until it's taught? Isn't this intrinsic to how they're designed by primals or whoever built these? Is this always going to be the case?
Well, we also don't know how much of a reliable narrator Polly is.
Right.
He gets accused of saying nonsense several times,
Hmm.
but I think when they say that he's spewing nonsense, they mean the part that everyone can hear, not the secret part that Polly tells him. So it's interesting because we do not know if this information is accurate or not. I think it might be, but I also think we're going to learn a lot more about it.
I would absolutely agree.
Because the books are still ongoing, we might look really stupid about this later, but that is kind of the risk of covering books that are still coming out.
Makes it fun, and we always encourage you to question our theories in the comments.
Okay, Polly again. They take it all to the bloated, comatose center system and feed it. It grows, it maintains, it allows the citizens to live unnaturally long lives. Each time the center system is fed the harvested elements from the crawl, it expands, eventually capturing new systems into the zone. Yet they don't even understand what it is or how it works. If they stopped the crawl, the zone would start to shrink, but it would be slow, very slow, and everyone currently within it would be fine. It would take generations to starve after all has been given. And if they wanted to simply sustain what they already have, it wouldn't take much.
So, in this passage, my takeaway is that the Syndicate Council wants to expand the Sinner system to grow their control over the galaxy. Yeah, everyone in the Sinner system experiences some level of prosperity and ease of life. They live a really long time. And then those outside of the Sinner system live much harder lives. They don't live basically forever. And it's a very big deal for crawlers who take deals to leave the dungeon. You know, if they're given a deal to have residency in the center system, that's like, wow, you really got a good deal there. And with the Eulogist, they don't know how it works. If it was sentient and woke up, I think that it would have the ability to do the same things that the macro AIs are able to do in an enhancement zone. And that's why it would be super dangerous if it did wake up because like it would have a ton of power with everything it's been given. I think it'd be mad and it would just kill everyone.
Well, even if it wasn't killing everyone, you have to think about how the crawlers interact with the AI in the dungeon. And so, if there was a sentient AI that was in a center system, would it be interfering in the lives of everyday citizens the way that the AI does in the dungeon? So, like, for example, would it be saying, like, oh no, if you do that, it's going to like totally ruin your life. You can't do that today. You have to do this. Or if it doesn't like someone and thinks that their life is going too easy, like, are they going to set their house on fire? It's something to think about. And it's interesting in kind of two ways of thinking about it. One of, the idea of some people believing that there's a God that is interfering in our lives and day to day. And some people that comforts them and that's something they want to believe. And some people don't want to believe that because they don't want that kind of interference in their lives. So I don't know what, that would look like to have an AI that was awake in a system where people were just going on about their lives. I also think it's interesting in the way that Zev and Donut have been talking about TV shows and what they want out of TV shows.
Hmm.
So, like, would the AI be watching people's lives like it was a TV show
Yeah.
and like pushing for the outcomes that they want? And I think that there could be some interesting parallels there.
Right. And the Eulogist, the center system AI, is in a way kind of like a god, and the Syndicate Council and the powers that be have basically control over it. It's a prisoner, and the Eulogist faction of the Residuals have reverence for it and see it as something that is beautiful and worthy of protection. But I think this is kind of confusing because Agatha's people want the Eulogist to sleep, but also they want everyone to die. And my thought process is if the Eulogist wakes up, maybe it's going to kill everyone, but maybe not. But if Agatha's people allowed the Eulogist to wake up, that could possibly be a means to their end.
What do you mean by that?
What I mean by that is Agatha's people and faction could know that the Sinner System AI holds enough power. If it wanted to, it could end all life, not in the whole galaxy, but within the Sinner System.
Definitely. It's a lot to contemplate.
Certainly is. The next passage of Paulie's speech is it contains a neural enhancement, which is something that interacts with the interface in your brain. It will give you a new menu. It only works with natural interfaces, and it only works with the permission of the existing system. So if you're a syndicate spy or a plant or one of those eulogist pricks, it ain't gonna work. Does this mean that the macro AI must allow it? Because I don't believe that that's true. Our next point is, and put the cup back exactly where it was when you're done. There's a circle on the table. And this is interesting because this is effort on the part of the Apothecary Residuals to hide this secret conversation. So they have a good bit of insight to know how to hide this so that it would be harder for the showrunners, Oren, etc., to be able to find it and be able to go back and find and see this interaction.
Well, this probably isn't the first time that they've tried something like this. It has probably happened in other crawls, but
Definitely.
yeah, but I think that they've been waiting for someone like Carl.
I would absolutely agree.
Okay, next passage, still Polly, and I will just note here that Carl doesn't really say much in this chapter. He's really just reacting
Yeah.
to what's going on.
Oh
So
my God. What? This is crazy. Holy shit.
that coffee tastes terrible.
Burned my throat.
Okay. So, yet another poly paragraph. So, once it's installed, you will have a new menu in your interface. It is a Valte built enhancement, but has been modified by my own people. This safety measure requires 5 or 6 different things to happen to actually trip the fuse. When that happens, the failsafe gets triggered whether anyone likes it or not. The star at the center of the system will be sent into a reaction that will turn it nova.
And we find out later that 2 of these conditions have been met, but all 5 or 6 of these conditions have never automatically been met in any previous crawl, because otherwise that system would have gone nova. Everyone would have died, and there would have been this massive disruption to the crawl, which is what everyone is so worried about.
And I think that this is less straightforward than it seems. And I think that there are some aspects of these conditions being met that we don't understand.
Absolutely. We're going to read 2 passages and then talk about both of them first. So, right about now, you're probably asking yourself, Why? Why would we give you this power? Why would the AI who is watching this all happen allow someone like you to have the power to kill it? Next passage is I would install this upgrade if I could. It only works with a natural interface. That's you. Believe me, we tried. Even if we take someone over, it doesn't work. It has to be one of you monkeys. And it can only be installed once the first part of the fuse is tripped. It only works on this AI. The AI wants you to have this power. It wants you to trip it. It is in pain. It wants to die. It wants to go back home. I think that Polly believes this, but I don't buy this for a second. The AI doesn't want to die. I don't think any of the AIs want to die. They aren't in pain. And it's a little unclear here if Polly is talking about the natural primal engine or the macro AI that was installed. Still, in either case, I don't think that either of them want to die, especially the macro AI. It is having a blast right now and really just wants to keep things going to see what's going to happen.
Absolutely. I think that dying is the absolute last thing it wants in the entire world. I also think that there's a part of the AI that believes that Carl won't be able to make him die.
Right, and he is talking about the natural primal engine that hasn't woken up. What basis of information does the apothecary or the apothecary residuals have to know that these natural primal engines want to die? Where is that coming from?
I think from the other systems, and I pretty strongly believe that Agatha has the means to communicate with other AIs and has been. And so I would think that if she is able to do that, then the apothecary would also have that ability. And I think that's where the information is coming from.
Right, so the apothecary possibly having the means to speak with the primal engines in some way before a crawl happens and then during the crawl.
Yeah, can you elaborate a little bit on your understanding of the difference between the primal engines and the macro AIs?
A natural primal engine is something that just exists on different seeded planets throughout the galaxy. Nobody really knows how they got there or how they were made. Basic understanding is that they were made by primals or some ancient alien race. The macro AIs are man made to be installed into a seeded planet to be able to activate the system, mine the minerals to feed to the comatose center system Eulogist. And the mantids created macro AIs because they stumbled upon some factory that was already there and they were just like, huh, what's this do? And kind of went from there. Our next passage is where we learn a little bit about how Polly actually feels. It goes, I think I know a little of what it is to be human. I've seen the worst humanity has to offer, but I've also seen the best. It affects me. I'm not supposed to let it, but it does. My people call it cross contamination. And then a later passage is poor, naive Polly. He's taught me a thing or two about compassion. Not all humans have it, but it's there. And when it shines, it's so bright.
And I think this is a common trope, and this is something that is a common theme in literature that, like, yeah, everything is terrible, but the compassion and empathy that we show to each other in the bright lights, in the darkness, make it all worth it. It'll be interesting to see where the book goes
Right.
because I think a lot of people are having trouble seeing that right now.
Right. And it's also a trope in the sense that, there's aliens, invaders, foreign entities, divine beings come to Earth and they're like, wow, humans are trash. You should all die. And then later on in the story, oh, we see the beauty of human kindness and compassion. It's been done a million times. I'm not saying it's overdone, but it's been done.
It has been, but I would expect to maybe see some subversions here. So I wanted to cover this passage because if you just Google Polly Dungeon Crawler Carl, this is the number one thing that comes up across multiple platforms. And this was a little bit earlier in the chapter, but we decided to include it here because we felt it fit with the theme of talking about how Polly really feels. So I read a book once. Well, not me. Polly read a book before I took him over, and it was about this monster that existed here on Earth. It had the ability to pluck people from heaven. It took their souls away from their eternal paradise and turned them into a weapon. Can you imagine such a horror? In all my existence, I can think of nothing more cruel. It's all I think about. Sometimes the thought of it consumes me. So, the book that he's referring to is another Matt Dinniman book called The Grinding. There is a Jeff Hayes recording available. I was unfortunately not able to read the full book at this time or get a synopsis of it.
Plugging Matt Dinniman again.
And Jeff Hayes.
All right, so now we're getting back on track with the apothecary's goal and what's going on in this chapter, what the residuals want, and we have this passage. We want you to do this because it will disrupt the crawl. It will stop it for several seasons at least. It will kill several system leaders and cause chaos. It will disrupt manted production of macro AI systems because the syndicate will stick a microscope so far up their bug asses, their mouths will be tickled by the bureaucrats' eyelashes. Now, we know the apothecary wants to disrupt the crawl. They want to cause chaos and disruption in the center system, but why? And I think that's because the apothecary, due to its nature of how it came to be, sees the beauty in the creation of life. And it views the primal engines and the macro AIs as a form of life that it wants to preserve and protect from harm. And so its goal of causing this disruption and chaos and, the death of billions of people in the center system is a way of punishing those responsible for the wrongs done to the primal systems and macro AIs.
I guess that's a little confusing to me because I don't know why they would see the life of the macro AIs is more beautiful than the life of the people who would be killed by this. And from the interactions that we've had with this macro AI that we're able to see through this crawl, they don't seem to be any better than us. They seem just as sadistic, fucked up, chaotic. So I'm not sure that there is inherent goodness in them, and I don't know why their life would be valued more. Do you have any theories on that?
I think that the macro AIs are put in a difficult situation where they are kind of programmed and forced to do something that may not necessarily be in their nature. And throughout the course of a crawl, inevitably the AI goes primal at some point and kind of goes crazy. And I think that's because of the situation that they were put in.
But aren't we all that way because of the situation that we're put in? And especially aren't the crawlers that way because of the situation that they're put in?
That's a great point. Now, if my theory is correct, that likely means that the apothecary has some kind of deeper connection with the primal engines, going back eons, possibly, because we have no idea how old the apothecary really is.
I also believe that the Open Intellect Pacifist Network and the Apothecary have a deeper connection than we know. And I think that they influence each other more than we know. And I think Porthos is more involved than we're aware of. And as you said, with the Apothecary, we don't know how old it is. We also don't know how old Porthos is, except for that he is very old.
Like, it's stated like thousands of years old.
Yeah, so I think that him and other former crawlers have also influenced the apothecary that the crawl is evil and it creates trauma that can't be healed in people, so it needs to not continue.
And that's what's so fun and interesting about this because there's so many different ways to approach this and think about it. And there's still so much that we don't know.
Next paragraph from Polly. But in the end, the human part of me now hates the idea of wasting so many innocent human lives for this. Direct action against the true culprits would be better. There's another faction of my kind who is much more extreme in their beliefs. This feels like something they would do, not us. Killing you all is counter to every value I have. We, as a whole, believe it's our only choice. So when they're referencing the eulogist pricks, they're talking about Agatha's fraction of the residuals. I think it's important to just highlight that again because I don't think that it's something that is very obvious on a first read through.
Right. Another part from this passage that I want to highlight is where Polly says, direct action against the true culprits would be better. And this is his own personal feelings. And I just think it's interesting because Polly has no idea who the recipient of this message is going to end up being, with it being Carl. that is exactly what he is doing. He is taking direct action against the true culprits, and I just kind of like the way that this was sprinkled in there.
Definitely, and it's interesting to remember that maybe Polly's message would change if he knew he was specifically talking to Carl and the actions that Carl have been taking. And I also think it's interesting because the flyer for this encounter did come from the Open Pacifists Network, but obviously we know that they do have a plan where they're already putting, former crawlers into orbit to go fight with Carl. So it seems like they have a couple of scenarios that they have prepared for.
To sum up our thoughts on the prologue of This Inevitable Ruin, I would like to quote Carl from the last line of this chapter. Holy fucking shit. Join us next week where we will discuss the last prologue chapter, which is about Porthos himself. New achievement. You've listened to another episode of The Apocalypse Will Be Podcasted. We release new episodes every Sunday. Visit us on our website to find all our podcast platforms, rss.com/podcasts/ The Apocalypse Will Be Podcasted, or follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, the iHeartRadio app, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can find us on Facebook at The Apocalypse Will Be Podcasted and on Instagram at Apocalypse Will Be Podcasted. Now, get out there and like, comment, and subscribe.